Job, starts out great. Look what the Lord said. And the Lord said, there is none like him in the earth. Talk about being God's favorite. Oh, okay. Talk about being God's favorite. Here's a man that God said, there's nobody like him. In fact, when we start reading it, God's going to say, Job is a perfect guy. Now, he's not perfect like our Lord Jesus is perfect. He's not sinless. The Lord uses that term, and he uses it rather loosely, and I'm glad he does, because sometimes he applies it to us. You'll remember David, who he would say about David, look at my servant David, a man after my own heart. And he would say to the other kings as they came along, you ought to be perfect like my servant David was perfect. And we say, wait, Lord, apparently you didn't read 1st and 2nd Samuel. Lord, did you bother to read those Book of Kings at all? Because when you meet David, oh sure, he was a wonderful shepherd and he killed that giant. But then he goes on to have 26 wives. He goes on to murder a man to get his wife. And not exactly the guy you want living next door to you sometimes. But yet, what did God say about him? He's perfect. Moses, now there was a perfect man. Except there was that time he killed that Egyptian guy out behind them pyramids, wasn't there? Whenever God talks about a perfect guy, he's not talking about them being sinless. He's referring to the fact that they had faith in him. That was always the standard. And so as we meet Job, let's take a look at this. Now, Job is a book. You will do yourself a great favor. When I was a young Christian, when I was first starting out, one of the first studies I made was this book of Job. When I came across it, I remember reading it, and I thought to myself, wow, I should learn a little bit more about this guy. And I have noticed in my life a whole lot of Job's life in mine. And maybe you have too. And one of the things that we meet, a couple of characters in this book, of course, Job is going to be the main character. We're going to meet God, and we're going to meet the devil. And we're going to watch as the devil tries to drive, and this is true of all of our lives. The devil will try to drive a wedge between God and Job. Now, you and I are privy to information that Job doesn't have. We're going to read the first couple of verses of Job. He's going to be going on his merry way. Everything is going good. Then all of a sudden, you and I are going to be raptured to heaven. And we're going to eavesdrop on God and the devil. And we're going to know something that Job doesn't know. And we're going to say, oh, now I understand why he's having this problem. But Job doesn't. That's like us. We don't get to peek into heaven. You don't get to peek until you get there. At least you don't get this kind of information. Why am I logging off? And why am I shutting down? I'm going to need that in just a little bit, and you're going to want to see it too. Wait, I got to untangle this one more.
Shutting down. Well, it just kept flickering on, and I thought he was doing it. So
Well, something is updating on it, but that's okay. We won't need it for a little bit anyway. So look at Job. There was a man in the land of Uz. U-Z. Sounds a lot like the land of Oz. I wish. He probably wishes he was in the land of Oz too. He'd call the wizard or the scarecrow. Even the Tin Man would probably be able to help him out a little bit. Cowardly Lion, maybe not so much. But he's in the land of Uz. Now, Uz is probably, if you ever look at a map and you see the land of Edom, just to the west over there and a little bit to the south of Israel, that's where Uz is. We know that historically, although we're not given a real location, because the Sabians come and the Chaldeans come. Has to be close enough for them to be attacked by those two people. And the Sabians are a little to the south, the Chaldeans are a little to the north, and boom, there he is right in the middle. And everybody comes and takes his stuff. There was, so far everything sounds good. There was a man. Now let me say this. A lot of people will try to say that this wasn't a true story. It's just an allegory. But God doesn't use people's names when he talks about parables and allegories. He doesn't give that kind of information. For example, there was a man who went out into a field, dug it, found this great ruby, went off and bought it. We're not given any information as to where the field was at. We're told nothing about the man or his name. We're given no information, only that it was a man did this. Could be anybody. But here, now remember the story that Jesus told about the rich the rich man and Lazarus. He gave a name there. Didn't necessarily name the rich man, but he does name Lazarus, and he does tell a lot of detail about it, and particularly about where they spend there forever, right? So when God is telling a story, he doesn't give information, personal information. Job, he gives us a lot of personal insight, which means to you and to me that Job is a real person, or was. We'll go back to is, because when you get to heaven, you'll meet him. Job is a real person. Otherwise, what you're about to read and what you're about to study really doesn't matter. If he's not real, and none of this ever really happened, how do we then apply that to our hearts? Now, here's the problem. Jesus and the apostles all quote Job. So Jesus uses, and the apostle use him as an illustration or as an example. How could that be if he's not real? So we have to know and understand as we begin this book that first of all, we're talking about a real person, a person just like us. He starts out, God's perspective on him, and that's where we start. God's got his perspective on us. God sees us different than everybody else does. Now, Job is going to be seen by his friends just as people see us. Not knowing the whole story, they're going to fill in the blanks and usually fill them in wrong. You ever been there? You will be once or twice in your life. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright. And one that, and here's the key, one that feared God and shunned evil. God makes the whole premise upon this. David, in all of his writings, always makes note of the fact that he feared the Lord. Solomon, who is going to goof up big time, is going to, at the end of his life, though, make it right, and he's going to say, wisdom is the fear of the Lord. He's finally going to come back to his senses and realize that. So here's a man. Wow, we're going to be there forever, huh? So, do not turn off your computer. I didn't shut it off to begin with. Let's take a peek at him. He stays away from evil. And there was born unto him more good news, 7 sons and 3 daughters. 10 kids. So far, good news. The first few verses are nothing but good. They're giving us a biographical sketch of this man. All right, he's an upright man, someone who loves God. He's got a great character. This is definitely somebody you wouldn't mind living next to. Although he does have 10 kids. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household. So that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. All right, he's a rich guy. He's a godly man and a rich man. So far, everything's looking good. And here's the problem. People are going to assume he's a rich man because he's a godly man. The devil's going to flip that around and say, no. I believe he's a godly man because he's a rich man. Same. This is going to be the point of attack. So as we move forward now, he's very rich. He's got wonderful kids. But he's a man who loves the Lord. And they get us back to that. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them on their birthdays. They'd all get together to have a birthday party. And so they would take turns, and the girls and the guys would all come on over, and they would have a party at whatever brother's house. So far, everything's good. Verse 5, though, and this was so when the day of their fasting or feasting was over, that Job sent and sanctified them. Now, here's the thing. How does Job know how to do all this? How does Job know about the sacrifices? Now remember, Job, we are assuming that Job is probably a descendant, possibly a descendant of course, we know he's a descendant of Adam's children. But some are speculating that he may have been a descendant of Abraham's children. As he goes through, he marries his next wife, Keturah. Keturah means the perfumed one. And she's the wife of his old age, and he has 10 children with her. And those children all go on and continue to have children. It's possible that he came from that lineage. Edom is the lineage of Esau. It's possible he came from that line. So God had already spoke to them. He spoke to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve knew to make a burnt sacrifice. Abraham knew to make a burnt sacrifice. So their descendants would know and understand this was necessary, part of the religion at that time. So although not necessarily a Jew, he would be along that line. And we see that he is practicing a very primitive religion, just like Adam and Eve did. He knew that much. He doesn't know what you and I know. He is doing the best he can with what he knew. But he did know this, that God was a forgiving God. Now, what if my children, in the process of having this party, cursed God? And God got mad at them. So after the party was done, he'd call his kids over. He would anoint them, ask them to confess their sins, and then he would burn an animal as a forgiveness of their sins to God. This is what he did to sanctify them. And so these kids grew up knowing that God was serious, or Job was serious about his relationship to the Lord. And we see that because with 10 children, each one of them having their birthday, so you probably going to have a birthday nearly every month. And so as they're going along, this is a customary thing. And after the close of the party, all right, everybody come back to Dad's house the next day. And boom. He's a wealthy man that each of his children, he affords his children each their own home. Not a bad guy. Lots of money, this guy. So far, everything about him is good. And it was, after their fasting, they're gone, he'd sanctify them, and he would offer a burnt offering according to the number of them. If there were 10 kids, he burnt 10 animals. For Job said, it may be that the sons have sinned. Notice he doesn't say my daughters would have. I wonder why that is. It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God. Probably boys had a filthier mouth than girls, maybe. It used to be that way. Nowadays, boy, those girls will keep up with you, to say the least. And so It says, and he did this continually. This was a common practice for Job. So here we have this man. So far, everything we know about him is good. Everything he knows about his life is good. He knows that he's serious about God. He knows that he loves God. And he can see that God has blessed him. And he's got no reason at all to expect that anything's going to change, because if you're God's favorite, you're God's favorite. As he looks down the road, all he could see is this life. He doesn't know that there are two other sets of eyes looking at him. And what's about to change in his life, he doesn't even see it coming. And he's never going to get the answer why. Now, we know why because we're reading the story. But we're reading the story long after he's dead and gone. Because we're told at the end of his life. So we get the answers after he's gone. He didn't get the answers. It may be that you're going to suffer, and after you're gone, God may reveal to us some of the reason why he did that. How he got honor and how he got glory out of your life. I have spoke often about my mother after she has passed. While she was going through her suffering, she didn't know how come. And then she supposed one day, I suppose the Lord just wants to make sure I don't get to heaven empty-handed. He wants me to have a crown. And so I have used that statement from her many, many times. Because through her death now, she's still to this very day bringing honor and glory to the Lord from a statement she made. She didn't know God put her in that predicament so she would make that statement, so that I would have something to say. She didn't know that. I know it now looking back. She didn't. And this is what's about to happen to Job. Now, here's the thing. People, and again, the Pharisees must have never read the book of Job. Because remember the blind man? What did they say to him? What did the disciples apparently never read Job either? Because what did they say to Jesus? Who did sin? This man or his parents that he was born blind? And Jesus said, well, neither one of them. Job's friends are going to say, Job, this bad stuff's happening to you. You must have did something wrong. And when something happens in your life, a trial comes into your life, what's the first thing you say? What did I do? Why is God, I must have did something because God's mad at me. I never assume what's happening to me is because God's mad at me, because I wouldn't have done anything to tick him off to begin with. I'm careful enough of that. I know what's right and what's wrong, and I'm not going to get him into a contest where I challenge his authority. So I assume if bad things happen to me, it must be like he did with Job, that he is trying to find a way to allow me to bring honor and glory to him. Now, for how many thousands of years has Job been spoken about? How many thousands of years has he been used to encourage and strengthen and challenge not only the Jewish nation, but Christians as well? All these thousands of years, his life has spoke more than he ever did. Let me bring this all up into... I'm not going to sit there and click that all day. Not that important. It was just a map as to where it was and a picture or two of Job. But here's the kicker now. Look at verse 6. Now there was a day. You ought to underline that in your Bible. You want to underline that, circle it, write it on your forehead. Because I think all of us can quote this part. There was a day when the world fell apart for us. There was a day I wasn't expecting. A day that should have never, ever happened. And this is what we're about to find out. It simply begins by saying, now there was a day. What kind of a day? Well, look at this. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. You and I have been in heaven enough through the book of Revelation. We see that the angels come and they bow before the Lord and they say, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty." They've been doing that and they'll continue to do that forever. It was just a day like that. Just a day like when John went up into heaven and watched as the angels worshiped the Lord. It was just a day when God was getting glory. On earth, God was getting glory. There was Job burning that sacrifice. The smoke is ascending. God is being honored. There's God up in heaven as the smoke rises up into heaven. The angels all fall down before God saying, "Holy, holy, holy." And then there's the sacrifices being burnt on the altar, the sweet incense on the altar of prayer being made over there. We read all about those things. We know them now from the book of Revelation. Just a day like every day in heaven. There was a day. Nothing uncommon about it until it changed. We have these uncommon days that begin so common, so ordinary. We wake up, we put our shoes on, we get our cup of coffee, and then the world falls apart. Job had a day like that. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Oh, but look at that comma. Here's what'll get you. Notice the little thing. It's a comma. What does a comma represent in language? It's a pause, right? It's a breath. There was a day when the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. And God took a breath. And after that breath now, everything changes. Why does it change? Well, look who enters the picture. Now, Job doesn't see this guy. In fact, when you read your Old Testament, the devil is almost never, this is one of the few times he's ever mentioned. He is not even mentioned by name in the Garden of Eden. We're only told that a serpent came. It isn't until we get to the New Testament that they tell us the serpent was the devil. Adam and Eve, as far as they knew, it was just a shiny serpent that said, "Take a bite." When we go through the life of Moses, we read the books of Moses, we don't see the devil. He isn't mentioned. You go through the book of Judges, he's not mentioned. We just traveled all the way up. We have gone from Genesis now into the book of Job, and so far nobody, including David and the kings, nobody has mentioned the devil. He hasn't been mentioned once. Now we come to Job. And the sons of God come before, and guess, first mentioned in the Bible, first time his name is used. Isn't going to get used again until he tempts Jesus. Twice he's the tempter. He tempts Job and then he tempts Jesus. Other than that, he's not mentioned much in the book. Look how much attention we pay to him. Way too much attention. We give him far more credit than he deserves. But here he is. His first mention of his name. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And Satan came also among them. All the sons of God are coming. Hey, who's that one? Did anybody notice? No, because he looked like just all like all the rest. Did he have horns and a tail and turn his skin red? No. He looked like all the rest of the sons of God. He looked no different. But things are about to change on this day. Now look how many times his name gets mentioned here. The next verse, verse 6, Satan. Look at verse 7. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Where did you come from? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, I came from going to and fro in the earth. Wow, he must be tired. And from walking up and down on it. I was going this way, and then I went that way. I went to and fro, backwards and forwards, and when I got tired of backwards and forwards, I went up and down. So far, the devil's not saying anything. He's just telling God what he did. Look at verse 8, though. This is really where things change. And the Lord said unto Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? What? No, I was walking back and forth. I didn't notice anybody. And then after I got tired of walking back and forth, I started walking up and down. Did you consider my servant Job? I don't believe I ever met the man. Go and look him up. He's in the yellow pages. Let your fingers do the walking. And look at that. Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that fears God. Same. One that fears God and shuns evil. Then, you notice that there's always this if-then. It's common in computer language that we would say, if this happens, then we say to the computer, then go do this. If somebody hits the letter T, then print T up here. If somebody hits the H, then print H up here. It's called an if-then statement. God sort of uses it here. Did you happen to see my servant Job? If you did you notice a couple of things about him? Did you notice that he feared me? Well, did you? Yeah. Well, then God goes on. Oh, look at this. So again, Job is not aware of this, and so far nothing is happening. Just God and the devil talking about a particular person, Job. I hope they aren't talking about me or you. He's perfect and upright. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God? You see how he throws those questions in there? What's the first thing the devil tries to get us to do? Always doubt God. What did he say to the woman in the garden? Did God really say? Well, come to think of it, I don't know that he actually said it. See, she added a couple of words in that she shouldn't have. God said we can't eat of that tree because if we touch it, we'll die. God never said if we touch it, we die. So Satan goes over. He knows God didn't say you couldn't touch it. So he picks one off, hands it to the lady, and when she's holding her hand and doesn't die, God's word must not be intact because God said if I touched it, I'd die. And I didn't die by touching it. So God was wrong about the touch. If God was wrong about the touch, maybe he's wrong about that taste thing too. You might have something there. If God could be wrong about touching, he could be wrong about tasting. But God never said touching, he only said tasting. See, we have to be careful that we know and understand our book and that we don't add words into God's mouth because God won't bless the words. A lot of times we're thinking like those Jews did. If God loves me, he's only going to bless me. He's never going to use me to get any glory for himself. He's only going to make me happy. As the man says, happy, happy, happy. Not necessarily. Now there was a day, oh Lord, hope I don't have me that one. And there was a man, and he did love the Lord. But does he really fear you? Or does he only fear you because he doesn't want to lose his money? Maybe it's not so much you, maybe it's his wealth. Maybe it's not so much that we love the Lord, maybe we love the things God has given us. And we are really very materialistic in our life. Often, if you ever listen to how people present the gospel, especially folks on TV, when they talk about giving, how do they get you to give? They promise you that you'll get more. They don't say do it because God said you should do it. They said, tell you what, if you send me $1,000, I'll send you this green rag and God will give you $10,000. You want the 10,000? Then you got to send me the 1,000. Everybody sends them their 1,000. Guess the only guy who ever gets 10,000 is that preacher. Everybody else claims bankruptcy. God didn't say that. There's no way for God to bless those people because he didn't say that. And they didn't read their Bible and they don't know what God said. They're listening to a man and it's costing them. Preachers are always applying to our greed. You listen to them. There's always a promise to the greedy person in us. Never a fact. They always, you get those letters, there's always an appeal to the greed. It works well. Everybody likes to get something for nothing. They always, all commercials. You know, even when you buy a car, you watch the car commercials, they're promising you a lot. If I, an old man, should buy myself a new car, pretty young girls are going to stare at me. Not going to be able to help it. They're just going to, whoo-hoo, look at that old man in that nice car. That's the promise, right? Does it work? Nope. They always say, look at that old fool driving that car. There ought to be a younger kid in that car. Some good-looking kid driving that car that I could stare at. But the commercial, the promise is to my greed. You can have this if you get that. There's always a promise of getting something if you get this. They always apply to our greed. It works well in religion, works well in the commercial world. Job, on the other hand, is not aware of what's going on. Does Job hear God talking? Nope. Did God come down and say, oh, Job, I'd like to introduce you to the devil. You mind if we stand over here and have this conversation in front of you so you'll know what's going on from this point forward? Because some things are going to change in your life, and I want you to be aware of them. Did God even come down, the kind, loving, almighty Father, did he come down and tell this guy anything? Nope. God ever tell you, oh, listen, I just thought I'd wake you up and let you know you're going to have a bad day today. You might want to stay in bed for this one. Does he tell you that? He doesn't tell me. If he's telling you, I'm going to complain because he ain't telling me. It just goes along. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my man Job? Well, not until you brought him up. But I'll be sure and look at his life real close. Let me ask you a question, though. Are you sure it's not because you're giving him stuff? That he loves you so much? Good question. Might be something we want to ask ourselves from time to time. Then Satan answered the Lord, hast thou not made a hedge about him, and blessed the works of his hand, and his substance is increased? Listen, you have wrapped him around in so much protection. He hasn't had a bad day his whole life. He grows up, marries his high school sweetheart. They have 10 kids, and the kids never had colic. The kids never disobeyed. Oh, sounds like my kids. His kids were always, sounds like grandkids, doesn't it? They were always perfect. His house his servants, everything about his life was just, it's like porridge. Everything about his life was just right. You and me, it's too hot, it's too cold. But not Job. He was just right. And so God is put to the test. Maybe he is this special to you because you're so special to him. And then the devil continues, answering the Lord. But, he says, if you were to put forth your hand now, notice who he's trying to get to do the bad stuff. If you were to put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, he would curse you to your face. How often when we fall upon hard times, who's the first one we get after? Who all of a sudden doesn't love us anymore? Who hates me? Whose fault is all of this anyway? How much trouble does God get into at this point in our life? This is the lesson of Job. You don't know what's going on in your life. You don't know that God's watching over you and God's guiding and God's directing. You just assume he quit. God's on vacation. You're all alone. You did something wrong. And now, brother, you're paying for it. Because, well, you know, God was never all that good anyway. See, it's easy. Now, what does Job lack at this point? What's one word that has not been used in regards to Job yet? Have you ever yet seen the word faith mentioned in his life? Did God say, here is a man full of faith, like he did about Stephen? A man full of faith and the Holy Ghost. Does he say that about Job? No. Has Job had to have any faith yet? No. Because you don't need faith when everything is handed to you on a silver platter. All of a sudden now, Job's faith is going to be tested. And when we close the book, you're going to find out that Job not only has this good part said about him, but there's going to be another word added to his vocabulary, and that's the word faith. Sometimes we have lived our lives so spoiled, we were never required to live by faith. I didn't have to have faith when I was in the Navy necessarily. I didn't have to wonder where my next meal was coming from, because at 6 o'clock in the morning, when they opened up that kitchen, I could be first in line and eat everything I wanted. At lunchtime, as soon as that bell rang, I could be down there in the chow hall and I could eat and eat and eat. And then at 5:30, lest I didn't eat enough at lunchtime, at 5:30 when they opened the line again, ooh, Lord, I could fill my tray. I didn't have to have faith to get food. I got it for free. I didn't have to have faith to have money, because every 2 weeks they gave me a check for $150, $300 a month. I had like more money than I know what to do with. I was just too rich. Every 2 weeks, here's another $150. I'm not kidding. When I was in Hawaii, I had a stack of checks uncashed. So I got a letter, or actually a call, down at the shop. And the chief come up to me and he said, Terry, you need to go up and you need to go to dispersing. Said, they want you up in dispersing. I don't know why. So I said, all right, sir, I'll go up there. And so I get up there and I get to the dispersing office and I said, tell them who I am. And they said, oh, we got a question. We're not getting any checks back that we're giving to you. You're supposed to be depositing those checks, or you're supposed to be cashing those checks. Is everything okay? I said, oh yeah, fine. I got them. They're up in my room. They're in my locker. They said, would you do us a favor? Would you open a bank account and deposit those? We need to get those checks back.
Oh, so I went down, Navy Credit Union, opened an account, put all them their checks inside that Navy Credit Union. They love to see me, right? I didn't need faith. I had Uncle Sam. Now, when I got a little bit older, and all of a sudden I'm having a wife and I'm having children, and my family's outgrowing the church, guess what I had to learn? I had to learn something called faith at that point in time. And since then, my wife and I have had to have faith a lot of times. Sometimes that's what we had for dinner. Tonight, let's have some faith. Yeah, sometimes it looked like that's all there was. I remember once, speaking of my mother, my wife and I were just talking about this the other day. We went, and I mean, you talk about Mother Hubbard's cupboard. There wasn't anything up there. We never told anybody, though. We never complained. We weren't people to call and say, oh, we have it so hard. We told God. And now if God's got a big mouth, I can't stop that. But my wife and I were at home one day. My mother, who never visits, my mom is not like, I'm going to go over to Terry's house. She's not that kind of a person. You come to her house. My mother shows up one day, goes in the kitchen, and notice, how moms are, right? She sees there ain't nothing. Nothing. Poor rats laying in there starving half to death. Nothing. I mean, there ain't nothing in this house, right? Poor Nano, you wouldn't believe he's so skinny that, his belly button is playing Yankee Doodle on his backbone. I mean, there just ain't nothing in that place. So my mom says, let's go. She gets in the car. She has me drive her down to the butcher. She buys $100 worth of meat. Takes it back. I mean, we had more meat in that freezer. We couldn't even hold it all. And then she says, now all you need is some potatoes and this and that. And so she took us out. We got potatoes and vegetables. She told us how to make all this stuff last forever. And it nearly did. I mean, it was good, and it lasted a goodly long time. We never told anybody. God, however, knew. Because he was peeking in that cupboard. And he's saying, boy, that poor old preacher boy and them kids, they're about to starve to death. And so he sent the one person I would have never expected. Now, my wife's parents, sure, they were that kind. But not my mom. And so she came on over, met a need. See, that was all about faith. We knew we didn't have any monies. You don't have monies when you're young and starting out. But God knew and took care. Now, when I was starving, was I praising the Lord? No. But let me tell you, after I had that steak, I could sing praises for a long time, right? But here, see, you don't see some of these things happening to you. You don't know that next week you're going to be broke. It's just not there. Put your hand to him and touch him, and he'll curse thee. The Lord said to Satan, behold, I'm not going to touch him. Behold, all that he has, all of his possessions, are in your power. Only, he says, and I skipped a chapter here, only put not forth your hand upon him. Oh, Satan likes that. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. Now, we're going to finish this off here just a little bit. But okay, so far, what's happening in Job's life? He's sacrificing because his sons may have cursed God. He's not sure. So he's down there praying. He's got all these 3,000 camels, all these 3,000 sheep. He has got all these servants. There's his wife over there in the main house. There's his kids scattered out in their 10 houses around him in this beautiful valley. And he's got more than he knows what to do with. He has just finished sacrificing. While he is sacrificing, God and the devil are having a conversation in heaven. As he finishes his worship, God and Satan finish their discussion. Is he expecting anything to happen? No. He just made everything between him and God right. He just made sure he made everything between him and his children's God right. He is a happy man. He is serving the Lord. He's got no reason to expect any bad because he's doing everything right. And when you're doing everything right, nothing bad ever happens to you. Well, see, you and I have a little advantage that he didn't have, because so far in his life, he had never had anything bad happen to him. He had never, he'd probably hear your stories and say, "Ooh, you poor people, let me write a book about you." Right? And then there we'd have the book of Nancy, we'd have the book of Martha, we'd have the book of Reds, there would be all these books in the Bible. And Job would be crying, "Oh, Lord, how could these people have made it? Look at what they went through." And God says, "Oh, wait, I've been saving the best for last. I'm really going to cook you, boy." So far, it's a great day. He doesn't know about this discussion in heaven. He doesn't know that the devil just left God's workshop. Doesn't know it. Will he ever see the devil? No, never see him. Will he feel his presence? Oh, yeah. And his wrath? Oh, yeah. He's going to feel it. Look at the next section here. While he was yet speaking. Oh, wait, I forgot. There was a day, remember, another day. And there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest son's house. Not uncommon. The oldest boy's birthday comes along, everybody gathers over there. But look at what happens here. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabians fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell. I lost all my sheep and my servants? Yeah. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the fire of God is... Look who gets the blame. Is it the fire of God? No. But who do people see? You can't see the invisible. The fire of God is fallen from heaven and has burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I only am escaped to tell you. Wow, God's already getting a bloody eye, isn't he? God's fire. No, wasn't his. While he was yet speaking, so far he's got 3 servants. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and carried them away. Yea, and slain the servants. All of his animals taken, but his servants are all dead. Again, another one said, I alone am escaped to tell thee. All right, so now I got like 3 or 4 servants. I had hundreds. While he was yet speaking, there came another one and said, and this is the worst news. Another one came and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. All right. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And again, I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Then Job arose and rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell upon the ground and complained. No, it doesn't say that at all. What a weird guy. Then Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, fell upon the ground, and worshipped. What? And said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He's in pain. He's hurting. And when he's hurting and when he's in pain, guess what's beginning to waken? But he doesn't even know yet that he's going to have faith. He's saying what he has always said. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You know, when things first happen to us, we're in such shock that we say the things that we've always said. And then as time settles in and we have an opportunity to comprehend, it usually takes 2 or 3 days, sometimes a week. Then we realize what really happened and the severity of it, and then we begin to question. We don't question God at first because we're in that mood that God is with me. It takes a couple of days that we begin to question. Always we begin to question days later. We begin to think about it. We begin to turn it over. We begin to look at our lives and say, but I'm perfect. Even God said I'm good. So there isn't anything that I have done. So why is this bad thing happening to such a wonderful guy? I'll tell you why. Because God's a lousy God. Yep. Because I know I'm good, but I'm beginning to wonder about him. I mean, after all, what do I know about God? I know only what it says in the book. And since he wrote it, maybe he wrote some untrue stuff about himself. That's what I'm beginning to think. Because I know me, but I don't really know him. So we begin to base everything off of us. We become the center of right and wrong. And we know we're right. So if this happened to me, it happened to me because somebody else is wrong. And guess who that somebody else usually is? You have to blame God at some point because you're right and you know it. And so at first Job says, blessed be the name of the Lord. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Job, you're a retard. Your 10 kids just died. Do you think for a moment that if you lost 10 children, you'd say, blessed be the name of the Lord? It's not realistic. It is at first, because we're in the holy mode. He was just sacrificing to God. He just burnt those animals upon the altar, asking God to forgive his kids. He was getting ready. Oh, my kids are over at the oldest boy's house tomorrow morning. Hey, we got another sacrifice to make tomorrow. They're getting ready for the sacrifice that's going to come tomorrow. He knows he's a good guy. And he knows he's got good kids. But maybe God. And here's where the devil is going to come in now, and he's going to drive that wedge. He's trying to keep his fingerprints off of it. So he says to God, why don't you do it? Why don't you touch him? God said, I'm not going to touch him. I'm not going to touch Job with a 10-foot pole. I'll let you do it, but you can't touch him directly. You can't take his life. Only I can do that. But you can have everything else. I'll let you have everything else he has. I'm going to show you that my servant Job really loves me. And not just the stuff I gave him. It's kind of like grandparents. Do our grandkids really love us because they can get stuff from us? Or do they really love us because they love us? Rich people face this all the time. They become their fame. They become rich people. There was that guy years ago. Was real rich, real famous. He was a dancer. Can't touch this. MC Hammer. And the guy made $20 million every year. And he gave it away to everybody. Oh, he would buy this for that person and this. He was a generous man to a fault. And he wasn't watching his money all that good because he was making so much of it. But then music began to change just a little bit. And he was no longer the number one guy. And he had spent all of his money. And you know what left with his money? All of his friends. Gee, and when he would come to people and say, you know what, I need a little bit of help. You know that money that I helped you invest? Sorry. Don't know who you are, poor man. All of a sudden, all those people that loved him when he had money don't love him when he don't. And so God right here is testing Job, and he's not really testing Job for Job's sake. And this is important because Paul's going to point this out to you and to me. He's going to say in the Corinthian letter, the things you're going through, you're not going through for you. You're going through them for the next person who's going to go through what you're about to go through. My wife and I, our testing isn't our testing for us. It's our testing because you're going to face it. And I'm going to have to say to you, even in the darkest hours, God is there. How do I know that? If I'm like Job and have always been protected. I can say that because I've been there. I've been down the dark passage. I've been poor. I have been in need. Like you, I have suffered loss. All of those things, whatever it is that you are going through, I've gone through those same things. My family has been touched and hurt just like everybody else's. So I can say to you, yes, you can go through this, and yes, you can make it, but I can say it because I've been down that road. And here I still am. And Job's about to get to that point. Right now, he's saying all the right words. And he's going to say all the right words for about 36 chapters. And then he's going to get just a little bit touchy. But then by the end of chapter 42, or at the beginning of chapter 42, see, you thought it was bad with Esther because it took us 8 chapters to get to any good news. It's going to take you 41 chapters to get to anything good. It's all bad for the next 41. All bad. And maybe that's sometimes like our life. It's all bad for 41 chapters. Until God comes into chapter 42. Now me, I'm kind of hoping like Esther, maybe just 6 chapters. I can handle 6. 42 is a pretty long one. But he's waiting now. So as we go through the book of Job, be aware of this, that he doesn't know what you know. If he only knew, if he could only hear God and the devil have this conversation, it would be so much, because it isn't the loss that gets him. It's never the loss, because to be honest, all right, if I lose it, I can get it back. My wife and I had a 5-bedroom house. It's gone. But you can get stuff back. Stuff you can always get. Even kids you can get. We call them grandkids. And our kids grow up and then they leave you, but then they come back and they give you grandkids. It's like, yeah. And they dance and they do all them cute things that your kids weren't smart enough to do back when they was little. Because ain't no one smarter than your grandkids. Just don't happen. He loses everything. And it isn't the loss. It's the not knowing why. You ever notice how often people ask that question, why? We always want to know why, and sometimes there never is an answer to why given. There's an earthquake and people say, why did that happen? There's a fire and people say, why did that happen? Every time something happens, the first question people ask is why. It's that not knowing that drives us crazy. It's not the loss, it's not knowing why the loss. Especially when you know how good you are. When you know it's not your fault. You could point the finger at everybody else, but you know you didn't. My wife could sit there and blame her husband. It's probably Terry's fault. I know Terry did something. Got God mad. The trick comes when we have to blame ourselves. Because we know we didn't. Right? It's easy for me to blame everybody else. I usually just blame Nano. God's probably mad at me for Nano's sake. Right? Ultimately, though, see that we have to, we need to know why this, why, and it's the no answer. That's the hardest to deal with. It's when we ask God and He doesn't say a word. Drives us crazy. And Job is going to ask, and he's going to ask, and he's going to ask, and God's eventually going to say, I'm not going to tell you why. Because then you wouldn't need faith. See, faith is trusting God even when we don't know why. Not knowing how something works. Just believing it works that way. God's going to say, I want you to believe. See, for us, the mystery is solved. Because whenever I ask why, I got this. And I can say, why not? For God so loved the world that He gave. This is my evidence of God's love. And my evidence that He will never hate me. He will never punish me for my own sake. He punished Him for my sake. So nothing will ever happen to me as a punishment. I know that, I understand that. So I never ask myself, why is this happening to me? I only assume it's happening because God is looking for a way for me to bring Him honor and glory. And this is the way He has chosen. So as we go through Job, and we go through his problems, hopefully we'll come out with that conclusion. And we'll come out with something else in our life. Something called faith. The ability to see things that aren't there. That ability to believe in things that haven't yet come. I have every belief that Jesus is coming again. Have I seen it yet? No. I know there's a heaven. Have I seen it? No. I know that Jesus died on the cross for me. Have I ever really? I haven't seen that. But I know. I have faith. I have faith. The ability to believe